Hello, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here I bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It's currently the evening of February 1st, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 2nd, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the Gaza situation, the spokesperson for Qatari Foreign Minister Majid al-Ansari stated today that Qatar received initial positive indications from Hamas regarding the deal, adding that Israel has also agreed to a ceasefire. Celebrations reportedly broke out in Gaza. However, later his statements were adjusted after Hamas rejected these claims, and in Israel they were tempered down as well. Hamas representative in Lebanon, Usama Hamdan, stated in an interview to Al Arabi news agency that we are still at the beginning and cannot talk in terms of deals reached. Hamas itself put out a statement later that it is still studying the deal, adding that it is being discussed between the two leaderships, i.e. the external leadership headed by Ismail Haniyeh and the internal leadership in Gaza headed by Yahya Sinwar. Similarly, NBC quoted an advisor to Israel's war cabinet, stating that Israel expects that Hamas will only give its final answer in the coming days, and that the chances of a deal are still maximum 50%. The sources in NBC emphasized that Israel is still refusing to accept Hamas's demands for a complete ceasefire, IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, and release of thousands of Palestinian prisoners. In addition, the sources noted to NBC that there is disagreement between Hamas's external and internal leadership regarding whether to accept this deal and what are the terms to impose, specifically stating that Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip wants to hold on to hostages as long as possible until the war is officially over, while Ismail Haniyeh is showing some indications he may be willing to be more flexible. Related to this also, Finance Minister in Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, and member of the expanded cabinet, stated, "I don't see a deal in the near future. If it was up to me, I would break contact with Qatar and with Sinwar. I would talk to him only with bombs, bullets, and soldiers. And that would be the closest chance we could possibly get to bring back any hostages safely and alive." In addition, Palestinian sources reportedly close to the negotiations also added that Hamas will likely respond favorably to the Paris proposal on the one hand. On the other hand, it is likely to demand that before any deal is signed, it receives guarantees that Israel will withdraw from the Gaza Strip and end the war. Again, this relates to different reports that we've seen in the last couple of days. The different sources have stated that Hamas may agree to a first phase of the deal, even without a complete ceasefire. However, it is not going to agree to that phase if it doesn't have guarantees from Qatar and the United States that in the future, at the end of phase 2 and 3, Israel will accept a complete ceasefire and withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Regarding reports about the actual deal, Wall Street Journal today reported more details about the Paris draft and confirmed a lot of reports that came in yesterday, specifically from the Washington Post. They stated that the deal involves a 6-week truce in the first phase, in which Israel will also not employ any drones above the Gaza Strip. This is similar to the terms of the truce that occurred in November. During this time, Hamas will round up hostages and will release both women, children, and elderly, and those who are injured and sick. In the second phase, reportedly female soldiers will be released in exchange for an increased entrance of humanitarian aid. And in the third phase, male soldiers and civilians of military age will be released. Alongside all of these different phases, Palestinian prisoners will be released. The reports are that the discussions regarding the key, i.e. how many Palestinian prisoners will be released, is still one of the sticking points. Hamas is insisting on between 100 and 250 Palestinian prisoners per hostage. Other reports suggested that Hamas is insisting that only for soldiers. However, it is insisting that soldiers includes either those civilians of military age or female soldiers as well, which Israel wants to include as part of the women who are released, as well as the sticking points of a ceasefire and possibly an IDF withdrawal. The report in the Wall Street Journal also added that the IDF's attack in Khan Yunis have contributed to the external Hamas leadership willingness to negotiate, while the internal leadership is becoming more and more steadfast as it feels that the IDF may be closing in on it. It actually wants to hold on to hostages longer as a way to ensure its safety. Moving on to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip. There were no rockets and mortars sent from the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF again called upon Palestinian civilians in the western parts of Gaza City to immediately evacuate to Deir el-Balach through humanitarian corridors. The neighborhoods in effect in the IDF map that it called upon civilians to evacuate are El Nasser, Sheikh Redwan, the El Shati refugee camp, Rimal, Asavara, Sheikh Ajalin, as well as Tel El Khalawa. This tells us that the IDF is continuously going to expand its operations in the north. As Hamas has regained some of its control, the IDF has recently launched raids into the El Shati refugee camp and is, according to this report, likely going to expand its operations to the western parts of Gaza City as well. In the El Shati refugee camp, IDF operation that started several days ago is continuing. Reportedly, the IDF is storming different Hamas compounds that have been restored since the IDF withdrew from the area. In Gaza City, the Al-Qassam brigades of Hamas reported several attacks against different IDF units, including firing Yassin 105 missiles against IDF vehicles and engineering units, attacking IDF gathering sites with mortars, and downing and capturing 3 IDF drones in the Zaytun area. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there is continuing low-level fighting going on, both in the Netzarim or Nusirat corridor, as well as in the areas of El Burej and El Maghazi refugee camp. Reportedly, these include several bombings from the sky as well. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in Khan Yunis, the most intensive fighting continues. There were reports in Gaza that the IDF has left the Al Amal hospital 2 days after its forces entered the area. The IDF claimed that its forces never actually entered the area. However, the Palestinian Red Crescent repeatedly stated that the IDF is operating within the hospital. The Red Crescent also stated that tanks are still seen around the area. In addition, in Khan Yunis, a long-range rocket launcher was discovered today and destroyed. Very intensive fighting was also reported in the western part of the city. However, there were not many reports from neither the IDF, nor the Al-Quds brigades, nor Al-Qassam regarding what actually happened in the fighting in the last 24 hours. Regarding other news from the Gaza Strip, the IDF general in charge of Southern Command, Yaron Finkelstein, stated today that the fact that the IDF is able to return and operate in the heart of Gaza City after leaving it to fight elsewhere is an important capability that the IDF is demonstrating. It's important to note that while this is in fact part of Israel's narrative, saying that Israel is going to maintain security control so that the IDF can go back and enter into areas of the Gaza Strip whenever it needs to. At the same time, this also goes against some of the statements made by the IDF previously, where the IDF was stating the fact that Israel has not developed a strategy for the day after plan, not only for the day after the war. The day after Hamas is removed from these central locales is the reason that Hamas is now regaining control in northern parts of the Gaza Strip, and now the IDF has to go back there. So while he is stating that this is an important demonstration of IDF strength, the IDF has also criticized Israel's political establishment over the fact that it has to go back and re-enter these areas because there's a complete power vacuum. Other news, Minister of Defense in Israel, Yoav Gallant, visited Khan Yunis today. He stated that the IDF has broken Hamas's Khan Yunis brigades that bolstered that they would withstand the IDF, and that the military will next go to Rafah as well. He stated that in Rafah we will kill whoever is a terrorist and trying to harm us. He added that the IDF estimates are that 10,000 Hamas fighters have been killed and another 10,000 have been injured and are now non-functional, adding that Hamas is in deep distress and running out of weapons and ammunition. The fact that the Minister of Defense is stating that the IDF is going to turn to Rafah is critically important. Israel has been negotiating with Egypt regarding if it is going to operate in Rafah. Egypt is very worried about this, specifically about IDF activity along the border. The fact that the defense minister is stating that the IDF is already turning its sights there next may end up leading to a lot of pressure on Egypt to come up with some sort of deal with Israel to figure out if and how the IDF is actually going to operate in the area. In addition, reports came in today that in some regions of the Gaza Strip, the IDF has been systematically burning houses and structures of the Palestinians in lieu of explosives and mines that are in short supply. The report states that once a house is identified as being used for terror purposes, it is to be destroyed according to the IDF protocol. However, due to the monumental amount of structures that fit this profile, some units have turned to burning the houses down since they have run out of mines and explosives. According to reports, some of the units have developed methods of burning down structures very effectively so they become inoperative. Asked about this, the IDF spokesperson responded, stating, and I quote, "Detonating and destroying structures is done only after approval and only with appropriate methods. Other action taken during the war will be examined later on." In addition to this, 114 Palestinians who were arrested in the Gaza Strip as part of the military campaign have reportedly been returned to the Gaza Strip after interrogation in Israel. According to IDF reports, Palestinians arrested in the Gaza Strip are taken back to Israel if interrogation shows that they are not part of the Hamas, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or terrorist activity. They are returned to the Gaza Strip safely. Regarding casualties, no IDF soldiers were reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. The number of IDF soldiers who were killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began remains 224. 10 IDF soldiers were reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. That brings the total of IDF soldiers who have been injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,293. The Palestinian Health Ministry is reporting 183 Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 27,019. 66,139 Palestinians are reported injured in the Gaza Strip, and according to the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, there are still several thousand Palestinians buried under the different rebels throughout the Strip and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz today presented to a delegation of ambassadors the UNRWA file that Israel's Foreign Ministry has developed, showing that thousands of UNRWA workers are affiliated with Hamas. He stated later, and I quote, "UNRWA cannot be part of the day after in Gaza. They have failed. UNRWA is part of a terror organization that has become part of Hamas's killing machine. He also added later, UNRWA's mandate perpetuates Palestinian refugeehood and perpetuates terrorism. Other news related to the humanitarian situation, reports came in today repeatedly stating that the El Amal and El Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis are in critical short of supplies. According to some reports, they are sharing oxygen machines that are being transferred between the hospital based on needs. In addition, reports and movies from social media came in showing a rise of the black market prices in the Gaza Strip, specifically in the refugee camps in Rafah, amidst extreme hardship that is also a result of winter coming and the refugee camps being flooded. Reportedly, a tent in Rafah is being sold for the same price it used to cost to build a small apartment in the Gaza Strip, and flip-flops are being rented by the hour. Reports also say there's an inability to get basic goods like diapers and basic food necessities, and that hygiene conditions in the refugee camps continue to deteriorate. Other news. After in the last week Israeli protesters tried to block both the Kerem Shalom crossing and the Nitzana crossing to stop aid trucks from flowing into the Gaza Strip, today a group of settlers led by member of Knesset Tzvi Sukkot of Religious Zionism organized and tried to block aid trucks that were unloading cargo in Israel's port of Ashdod. Reportedly, there were several confrontations that erupted. These mostly targeted the Arab-Israeli truck drivers, and the movie specifically showed that the different settlers involved were actually moving through the trucks and locating Arab-Israeli truck drivers and attacking them and harassing them, while if they found that it was Jewish truck drivers, they let them go. There were no reports regarding how many trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. Yesterday it was reported that 247 trucks entered, which is actually an expansion compared to previous days. However, once again, there were no reports today, so it remains to be seen. Moving on to the West Bank, there was a Palestinian who attempted to carry out a ramming attack against IDF soldiers while they were carrying an operation near Hebron. He was reportedly shot and arrested. No IDF soldiers were injured. In addition, substantial IDF activity was reported in several different parts of the West Bank. These include the Kfar al-Labid area in Tul Karem, Ein el-Sultan near Jericho, also in the areas of Tubas, Arabe, Bethlehem, Beit Iba, and Yatta. Al-Qassam specifically reported that they engaged in confrontations with the IDF soldiers and specifically IDF vehicles in the areas of Tubas. Reportedly, 41 Palestinians were detained in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. I say reportedly because there was not actually an official report of the IDF. This was stated by Al Jazeera, and they explicitly said detained rather than arrested, which means these may have been people who were questioned. There's no report about how many Palestinians were actually arrested in the last 24 hours. Political news related to the West Bank. Today, after several months of threatening to do this, the United States imposed extreme economic sanctions on 4 Israeli settlers under special presidential order, stating that they are specifically the ones who are leading violent attacks against Palestinians. The United States stated that their actions threaten U.S. interests in the area, adding that they have asked Israel to deal with them several times, but that has not happened. The sanction frees their assets in the United States and deny them entry to the U.S., but perhaps more importantly, it also exposes them to possible ICC prosecution in the future, and also may lead to their assets being frozen in Israel as a result of banking agreements between Israel and the United States. According to the sanctions imposed by the United States, the 4 were involved in different violent activity against Palestinians. Specifically, David Chai Chisdei was reportedly initiated and led the Hawara riots and causing substantial vandalism, torching homes, and killing 1 Palestinian. These were riots that were carried out at the beginning of 2023 when a group of over 100 to 200 Israeli settlers stormed the village of Hawara, torching the area and causing a lot of vandalism and, as stated, killing 1 Palestinian. Einan Tanjil reportedly was involved in assaulting both Palestinian farmers and Israeli activists with stones and clubs throughout the West Bank. Shalom Zicherman reportedly attacked cars in the West Bank, and there's video footage that showed him blocking roads and attacking cars, including Israeli peace activists. And Inon Levi reportedly led groups of settlers to terrorize Palestinian Bedouins to leave their homes and farms, including torching fields and destroying homes. All this comes from the actual report of the United States when it imposed these sanctions. I will add, with regards to settler violence, that since October 7th, the United Nations has recorded over 494 settler attacks against Palestinians in the West Bank. I will state later in the section on political developments the Israeli responses to these sanctions. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. There were continuous rockets and missiles sent from Lebanon towards Israel today. These target the areas of Zar'it in the upper Galilee, Kibbutz Alon in the western Galilee, the areas of Metula, Kiryat Shmona, Margaliot. There were also 2 anti-tank missiles that were sent towards IDF outposts near the Hermon. Regarding IDF retaliations, the IDF reported that it attacked the Hezbollah military structure in Tir Herfa, as well as retaliating repeatedly against the different launching sites of those rockets and missiles. In addition, El Manar reported that the IDF carried out attacks in El Jabin, Yarin, Al Mash'ab, Tir Herfa, Adahira, as well as Al Habaria village. Other political news regarding the confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, there are reportedly debates within Israel regarding procedures that Israel should follow during the truce that may happen with Hamas. So I'll say that in the last truce that occurred in November, Hezbollah stopped firing at Israel, and at that point, Israel's policy was that it is only responding to Hezbollah fire, and thus if Hezbollah stopped its fire, Israel stopped its fire. However, right now, the IDF is actually carrying out much more initiated activities and is actually on the offensive compared to Hezbollah, and thus there's questions in Israel what to do if there is actually a deal and a truce with Hamas and Hezbollah stops its fire. According to the report, there are pressures in Israel that Israel should continue its fire because if it simply ceases its fire, it is going to be stuck in this truce that may be 6 weeks or longer, while its civilians that have evacuated from the northern parts of Israel cannot return home because Hezbollah is still at the border. And thus there's a lot of pressure in Israel that the IDF should continue its attacks and continue its efforts to push Hezbollah north, even if Hezbollah does not fire. However, this is reportedly still being debated. In addition, meeting with delegations of ambassadors today, Defense Minister in Israel, Yoav Gallant, stated that the diplomatic window in the north is narrowing. He's been stating this repeatedly. Amidst this, it was also reported today that Amos Hochstein, the U.S. Special Envoy to the area, is due to return to Israel next week. In addition, the IDF today published a summary stating that in the war up until now, 427 houses and structures in the northern parts of Israel have been damaged from Hezbollah rockets and missiles. Other news related to the north, this time to Syria. Reuters reported today that amidst the recent wave of assassinations that reportedly Israel has carried out in Syria, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, IRGC, has recalled its officers in Syria back to Iran and is going to rely more on its affiliated militias in the area. The report quoted sources stating that Iran is fearful of being pulled into a regional war, i.e., if more high-profile assassinations are carried out in Syria, Iran will be quote-unquote compelled to retaliate, which will pull it into an all-out war. This leads us to the reports on the regional developments. CNN quoted today's sources in U.S. intelligence stating that Iran is in fact growing fearful and concerns over regional developments, stating that the attack against the U.S.-based Tower 22 caught it off guard and that Iran is actually not interested in spiraling to an all-out regional war. The report added that Iran is also worried about Houthi attacks that may start to threaten Chinese and Indian interests, which are allies of Iran. However, that Iran is still committed to the overall strategy of low-level regional threats and escalations, which is one of the reasons that it is on the one hand restraining some of its militias and pulling its activists and actual officers back from Syria, on the other hand still continuing to promote its militias to carry out these attacks. Other regional news, CBS today reported that the United States has approved its attack plan against Iranian forces in Syria and Iraq, and that the retaliation for that attack against Tower 22, is likely going to take several days. Regarding the situation in Yemen, the Houthis announced today that they attacked a British merchant ship in the Red Sea. UK MTO did confirm that a ship that was sailing under Liberia's flag was hit by a missile, however it stated that no one was injured and the missile in fact hit the ship. Moving on to some of the political and general trends from the last 24 hours, in Israel there are continuous protests going on with people demanding that the government come to a hostage deal. These protests are growing bigger and more intensive as the family members of the hostages promised they would. Other political news in Israel, responding to the U.S. sanctions against those 4 settlers, the head of the Shomron Settlements Council, Yossi Dagan, stated that this is a witch hunt and that the entire violent settler campaign amounts to 4 people compared to hundreds of terrorists who try to murder Jews in the West Bank every day. So again, that is the head of the settler blocks of the northern parts of the West Bank, stating that this is a witch hunt of the United States. In addition, Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir stated that President Biden is wrong in how he treats Israeli citizens and that the settlers are in fact heroes. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office stated that the move is extreme and out of line, adding, and I quote, "The vast majority of settlers are law-abiding citizens. Israel operates against anyone who breaks the law anywhere, and thus there is no reason for such extreme measures." The finance minister and head of religious Zionism, Bezalel Smotrich, stated, and I quote, "The violent settlers campaign is an anti-Semitic lie spread by Israel's enemies in order to tarnish the pioneer settlers and the settlement campaign." He added later, "It is a shame that the Biden administration is cooperating with this." He also stated that he will keep on working towards a viable peace in the region, adding, and I quote, "This will only be achieved after uprooting the Arabs' hopes of establishing an Arab state in place of destroying the Jewish state. If the price is American sanctions that will be placed against me as well, so be it." He is referring to a report that came out today that the United States considered adding Smotrich and Ben-Gvir to the sanction list as well. However, the United States decided to postpone this until possibly after the war. Other news, the United States today approved a law denying visa or immigration to the U.S. of anyone who was involved in executing, planning, or funding, or supporting the October 7th attack. This passed with an overwhelming majority in Congress. Other news, the UK Foreign Minister David Cameron today stated that the United Kingdom may recognize a Palestinian state at the end of the war, regardless of Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. This is something that's been reported several times in the last several days, that both the UK and the EU are considering recognizing a Palestinian state in the future, regardless of what happens with Israel. Other political news, Thomas Friedman published an opinion piece in the New York Times today. He presented what he calls the Biden doctrine and stated that he hopes the administration accepts it. According to what he stated, the Biden vision is to take a firm stance vis-a-vis Iran that will include possibly military retaliations against Iran as well, if necessary, an unprecedented diplomatic initiative and pressuring all sides, and specifically Israel and the Palestinian Authority, to work towards achieving a Palestinian state, as well as a wide military alliance with Saudi Arabia that involves normalization with Israel. Friedman stated that all of these different sides are interconnected with one another, and stated that the Biden administration should throw its weight into this, specifically calling both Iran's bluff that it is willing to go to war with Israel, and Prime Minister Netanyahu's bluff that he is going to reject the Palestinian state regardless of what the United States has to say. So that is at least what Thomas Friedman is saying the Biden administration should adopt. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.